Welcome to Associations Unplugged, Kellen Europe's podcast helping you future-proof your association. My name is Anna Gumbau, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking all about narrative, all about storytelling. Why narrative is so important for associations to stand out, to position themselves, and how can storytelling strengthening your positioning as your association. So let me welcome my two wonderful guests that are joining me here in the studio today. Let's start by welcoming the Senior B2B Advisor at Euractiv, Gökşen Çalışkan. Welcome.
Thank you, Anna. Great to be here with you, both of you.
And from my left side, we have the Associate Director at Kellen Europe, Simona Romeo. Welcome, Simona.
Thank you, Anna, and good to be here.
Great to have you both here. So let's start by really dissecting the topic that brings us here today, because we hear a lot about narrative right now in the Brussels advocacy circles, in the EU bubble. But what does it actually mean in practice? What is the difference between really having a narrative and just having some talking points? Maybe Gökşen, we could start with you.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a great starting point. And we talk a lot about the narratives, but we don't necessarily know what it means. I think in my view, in simple terms, narrative is a point of view, is a worldview, told in a way that moves people and delivered consistently through a variety of messages to the people in the right moment, in the right places where they are. So in that sense, I see that narrative has three key components. The first one is the audience centricity, basically telling the story from the perspective of how the end user audience would pursue it, would feel about it, not from the perspective of who is sending the message necessarily. The second aspect is the emotional aspect, emotional arc, meaning we need to guide people through a certain kind of change in understanding and in feeling, and offering a world as it could be, like something to believe in. And the third element to me is the systemic delivery. You know, we need to repeat the messages over a certain period of time so that it can stick. Coming to the second part of the question, the difference between narrative and talking point, they're two different things, but I believe they are complementary one another. They are the musts of an overall narrative. Narrative would be something more overarching. It's the umbrella term that is more stable, that is more long-standing, and that offers this world vision, the world as it could be. And talking point could be part of the delivery, part of the package in that sense. So it is how we express the narrative. So it could be talking points, it could be slogans, it could be advertising, images and so on. So I feel there is a key distinction. Narrative is the overarching exercise, the story, and talking point is how we express that story with different angles.
I love that. So narrative would be a little bit like the DNA, like the way the association has come to grow and to happen. And
exactly.
Why
exactly. It's a key element,
I love these three elements that you brought up: the audience centricity, the emotional art, the systemic centricity. Maybe Simona, coming to you, why associations should care more about building their narrative? What would you say?
In my view, associations, by their nature, they tend to focus and they want to focus on facts and evidence, because obviously they are concerned about maintaining the reputation, sound credible towards, the institution and the different stakeholders. However, I've been in Brussels for over 8 years, and I've seen a shift when it comes to policy communication. Before, evidence was enough, right? Having something on paper, a study, something concrete, data was enough to explain, to sell your arguments. I think, the policy communication in Brussels has become more political. Evidence matters, so that's something I want to make very clear. So I'm not saying that, data and facts and science-based evidence, they don't matter, but the way you tell the story matters most. Also, at the different level of stakeholders you are talking to, but it's really important that the narrative is built around those data and facts and proof points, because you need to be able to resonate, to tell the story to everyone. Now, the way, in which we consume news or, any sort of information is very fast. Our level of attention is always very low. Everything needs to be faster, sharper, quick. And if you don't have an overarching narrative, you may be missing the point.
Absolutely.
So that's how I would see, and why I would see association needing more and more narrative in their communication.
So I would say that the baseline, the evidence, the need for evidence stays, but this is bringing once again the emotional arc into it. And Gökşen, do you feel also that there's been a shift in recent years in the way that we communicate, in the way that we bring narrative and story?
I absolutely think there is a shift. Just to echo what Simona said, in the past, I think two things have changed over the years. In the past, it was, as you said, enough to go with your position paper, to talk to an MEP, go to a commission official, express your point of view with fact-based, evidence, etc. It was enough, and technical precision was what was more looked for rather than the emotional aspect. But I see that two things have changed over the years. The first one is the advancement of information technology. So whatever is happening here has some sort of footprint in broader, public sphere. So people through social media, digital sources can easily see what is being discussed and can somehow understand, the implications in their day-to-day lives. It is not enough, we must admit, because we know that EU policy communication is still very limited to this bubble, but still, the impact of what we are discussing here in day-to-day lives of the people are more visible. So now associations and all the other organizations need to design their strategies, not only to target the policymakers, but also to broader audiences through media or through organic reach. So that's one shift. And in order to communicate things to people, you need the emotional arc, you need an overarching narrative. The second thing I see that is happening or has been happening is the rise of populist and right-wing movements, which are way better at communicating with people, touching the hearts and minds of the people better than the progressives, let's admit. So there's a lot of communication lesson to learn there. They are faster in also decoding the rules of social and digital platforms. And this way of connecting with people is kind of a wake-up call also in the EU bubble. So all organizations now are paying attention to what could be done. I don't want to say what they're doing is necessarily creating narrative, because what they do is creating a story to manipulate, to misuse whatever they are doing for political gain. Narrative is more serious, more disciplined, and that makes a specific issue, technical issue, more legible, more salient, more meaningful, without distorting the facts. So there's a clear distinction there. But these two changes, I think, over the years, made it more clear for organizations here in Bubble that it is not enough just to target the policymakers, but also pay attention to what the broader audience would feel.
If I may add, I completely agree with what you're saying, but also something that I've been seeing is probably organizations are understanding more, or if they don't, they should, that policymakers at the end respond to their constituencies.
Exactly.
And they need to report back, allow me the wording, to their people who voted for them. At the same time, we cannot expect everyone to be an expert, right? In Brussels, we have plenty of associations for everything, representing everything. Some of them, they are very technical. So when you talk to a policymakers, in the different phase of legislation, what really matters is what difference does it make for your constituencies, for the people, job creation, better life. We need to be clear in the way we frame this narrative. And that's probably the shift we need to make. However, I would be also, I would be very careful, and associations are as well, in the fact that you shouldn't be oversimplistic. That's also the risk, okay, we need to be fast, we need to be sharp. At the same time, some topics remain very, very technical, and this shouldn't, oversimplification should be, I would say, balanced. I'm not saying that, we need to find a balance between being, easy to understand, but being precise.
Exactly. I think this is such a great point, what you said. I would also make a clear distinction with MEPs and the Commission people in that sense, You're rightly saying that the MEPs are responsible for their constituency. They have a mandate. And this reminds me of the definition of, policy comms in general. We tend to specify it mostly focusing on the EU bubble institutions and organizations doing or trying to do the influence, to gain influence for the, institutions, but it is also communicating to the broader public. So using a good narrative that touches the hearts and minds of people will indirectly influence the MEPs at the end of the day. So there is a great potential with the narrative.
So what I'm getting from here is that the reasons from the shifts have come from, first of all, a switch in the massive change in the technologies, right? In the tools, in the channels that we're using. The number of players communicating is also changing with the rise of populism. And movements that are trying to tear down the credibility of everything that we've built, and that leads that also that the audiences are shifted, that we're communicating to a broader audience. Maybe Simona, I would like to come back to you and ask you, would you highlight any particular examples of associations that are really using narrative and making the most of storytelling to get their message across? Maybe do you have some examples from Kellen's perspective that you could share with me?
Plenty. To be honest, I can range from campaigns to, defining their voices or finding their voices. Maybe I would, the first one that comes to my mind is the latest EU Salt campaign. Never lose your eye. By eye, it means iodine. So basically, it was a very good campaign. So the EU Salt is the Association of Salt Producers, and basically, this is an example that shows how the science-based arguments and evidence, because in this case they were talking about iodine deficiency. There was a full report. It was a joint work with the NGO as well. So it was completely scientific. But the point was they wanted to raise awareness about the topic. So besides the classic, targeting the parliament, the breakfast and the social media and so on, they did a billboard campaign in the EU bubble. So they had billboards in the metro, in Plus Lux, with this catchy campaign, catchy hashtag, and with the visuals that were, going accordingly. The objective was really to get the buy-in or the awareness, from different people. So obviously the target was the bubble, were the policymakers, but what changed? They went where their audience was. Sometimes we are still talking a lot about, social media, AI, which is all important, but we forget that people are real, right? They travel, they go for lunch, they walk, they take the metro, and so where do I want my message to be delivered? So in that case, which was quite successful, without going into the numbers of the campaign, it's a good example because it translated science-based arguments into something that was for the general public. So the objective there was really, okay, I'm walking and I'm seeing this, I'm stopping there, I'm like, okay, what is this? Gauge some interest, raise some questions in people, and they achieved that. So that's one very good example. That's very evident, I would say, it's something that we can show. But we have also other associations like the Stevia Council, the International Stevia Council. So basically, the objective is to promote the use of stevia, right? they change their communication from something very scientific to the general public. At the end, who are we talking to? Who do we want to address? It's not just dietitians and policymakers in the health environment. The objective was to talk to everyone, so to target as many people as possible. So there is always this shift from evidence-based science to the general public. You can do it by using arguments that people can relate to. So that's something that they've been doing quite well.
I love those examples. So, and maybe Gökşen, then also from your perspective, if you would look at associations and organizations in the EU bubble in general that are doing a really good job in narrative and in storytelling and in communications overall, what would you say that these organizations have in common?
When I look at good narratives, I think, 5 key things that they do well, and your examples are very much matching. So the first one is actually they know why they exist. Why their association, what is the raison d'être of their association? It is not just, we are representing the manufacturers of this and that. It is why that matters. What happens to your organization if it disappears tomorrow? So knowing that is important. The second thing is knowing their audience. And audience in a sense that it is not the policymakers you're essentially trying to target. You are the broader, this is the broader audience. You and me eating salt, right? Exactly. We are the target audience. So understanding that character, as we like to call, which is not the institution itself, the organization itself. The third thing is, I like to call it a disruption, or in some cases, in some frameworks, it's called villain. So there is a change. It is either the health conditions have changed, it is the energy bills rising up. So there is a disruption that is making what you are doing is no longer viable or sustainable. So paying attention to that aspect. And then the fourth one is a resolution. In the beginning, I mentioned a world vision, a world as it could be. If you consume more salt or in a, let's say moderate way, this and that would happen to your health, or this and that would happen to society, a healthier society. So that kind of world as it could be. And the fifth element there is a call to action. So basically, what do you want people to do? Is it to share more? Is it to discuss it more? Is it to have a bit of more awareness and this and that? So these 5 key elements, when I see them all together, it is not common, I must admit, but when I see them all together, I feel like, okay, these guys somehow nailed it. You already given great examples, Simona.
I love how we are dissecting the recipe and like bringing together all the ingredients, but coming back to the question around, evidence-based and credibility and storytelling, I was going to say versus, but we already agreed that it doesn't have to be an either or. However, I feel still that in the mindset of many organizations here in Brussels and beyond, sometimes they still feel this tension between one or the other. What would you tell a senior manager or someone in a leadership position of an association to really give up on this thinking, on this binary thinking of the either or, the evidence or the story?
So, if I could, provide an advice or say something is. I think there is an underlying question that probably any communication director or representative of an organization should ask on a monthly basis, at least. Why do we exist, and what are we changing? Because we are seeing more and more, there is this rush in reporting, in showing that you exist as an association by showcasing the meetings that you are attending, the events you go to, etc., etc. The point is, sometimes I feel there is this confusion between visibility and the impact that you are actually making. So probably you need to, if you don't have the answer to this question, why do we exist and what are we changing? that's probably something you should explore first. And probably on a monthly basis is too much, but every 3-4 months, yes, because sometimes we get lost, with all the things, association have to do. They have to report, to their board. They have to provide, of course, facts. But at the same time, you need to keep in mind there is on that, as she mentioned, as Gökşen mentioned. Why do we exist? And once you have this key element in your mind and your teams, the secretariat, the members of your association, which at the end they are the ambassadors, the association doesn't exist on its own, if the members are not supporting and sharing their, their position. And then you can produce asset, visuals. But first, you need to know why you exist and what impact are you making, in people's life, whatever sector you represent, because that's going to be easier to create the narrative. If you don't know why you exist, if you don't know why, what you want to change, what narrative are you building?
Right. So just as you review your strategy, your objectives, your KPIs in a regular basis or every few months' time, it's also a matter of reviewing your narrative and whether we're staying in track with our raison d'être and whether we are communicating it well. What would you say, Gökşen? What would you add to that?
I mean, this tension between, staying too credible and also having a bit of, emotional aspect to it, the tension is there. Obviously, and I see it, I hear it when I talk to especially senior leaders in organizations. What I tell them usually is, let's admit, majority of the organizations in the bubble, they work in sectors that are not naturally that sexy. No. So you cannot just, show up and expect people to come to your feet. You need to earn that visibility. You need to earn that credibility by really working on not just the technical aspect, but also the, narrative aspect, combining basically the facts and figures together. So in that sense, I always tell them, evidence does not, or let's say, emotional aspect does not replace the importance of the evidence. So you need to combine them. Without that, unfortunately, your influence will only be limited. So that's really my view.
But yeah, if I may use this platform also to share, I completely see what you're saying and I hear it every day. There is something missing. There is the next step. Being bold in, going, I wouldn't say too much out of the box because, I understand there are different stakeholders, people in the same association. You cannot, get everyone to agree on crazy campaigns, very bold campaigns, but going a bit out of your comfort zone, that could be a starting point. Because I understand that, publishing position paper and, resharing the same thing on social media, it's like, okay, we are there, we're doing our part. But then if you really want to, go the extra mile and being seen differently, you need to have, you need to be a bit bolder in your communication.
Absolutely.
You need to risk it.
I want to add to this because very recently we organized an event with the Pop Collective and the theme was humor in policy communications and the importance of humor and broader, emotional aspect. And one of the speakers said something that really stayed with me. She said, safe communication is invisible communication. So just staying in our lanes, just doing the right thing, but not taking a bold action to just for an extra mile will unfortunately cost you a lot as an organization. So I really love this and I want to repeat it. Safe communication is invisible communication.
Sorry, Anna, I mean, we're getting into this, this conversation.
I love this.
But for example, just open, if we all open our LinkedIn feed right now, what is the catchy phrase that make you read one post? Because again, I am overwhelmed by all this. I am pleased. We are satisfied.
It's your network.
Yes, I understand you need to be diplomatic and, we're working on in a very particular sector. And again, it's policy communication, but it's not political communication, which is completely different. In political communication, you can be bold, you must be in order to be visible. Here, I think there is always this point where if I'm too sarcastic or too much humor, then I lose my credibility. I'm not sure that's really the case, because at the end, you can write a very nice post with all the right things, in there. But I'm sorry to say, but if it's boring, people won't stop and read it, which is at the end what you want. Then again, the question is, how are we going to find the balance?
Exactly. And I think this emotional aspect is key, not as the essence of the strategy, but as a hook for people to start paying attention to. And then you grab them with the facts and figures, etc.
Absolutely.
That is, I think, key, starting from the LinkedIn posts, maybe.
So associations should let go of this fear of taking risks in terms of the way they communicate. Safe communication is invisible communication. So I take that as one of the things that associations should not be doing in the way they communicate. What are some other things that you see, either associations or organizations in general, in the way they communicate, in the way they tell their story, that they should stop doing immediately?
One thing that they should stop doing, I think they should stop leading from the institution, which I will explain, but rather, as we all said, act and sound more like human. So we see them saying, let's open up a press release or a LinkedIn post, etc. They say that as the leading voice of this industry, representing this many members, organizations from this amount of countries, we welcome the Commission's XYZ initiative, or we kindly criticize whatever, the jargons that they use. So it's literally leading from the institution. And contrary to what we're discussing about a narrative, your organization is not the character of your narrative. So you need to think a little bit differently. You can say something like, Europe's XYZ manufacturers are losing time, losing money for this and that reason. One of the reasons is the X legislation by the Commission, the implementation of it is fragmented in member states. So something that really touches the people, and the organization is still there, but not leading the narrative. So for me, they should really stop saying we represent, we advocate, we condemn, we welcome. Stop thinking about yourself. Don't be too selfish. You know what I mean? So just think from the perspective, at the beginning we mentioned, from the perspective of how your real audience, the end receiver of what you are doing, would feel, and communicate it to the policymakers or the broader public from that perspective.
Simona?
Plus, when we think of policy communication, there are a wide range of assets that association can use to communicate. So I would say, specifically for communication, I echo what Gökşen's saying. So don't be too selfish, that's for sure. But also, I would say avoid over-reporting. Again, do not mix visibility and impact with a checklist of things that you have done, which again, it's easy to report to a board, but it's not necessarily visibility. So in your communication, stop reporting what you did and say what you have changed. So that's an advice I would give. So if you are working on a specific policy and you're advocating for something and you're meeting with MEP, rather than saying, okay, we have met with this MEP, great. What did this meeting change? Okay, we got this by meeting this person and we're very happy and we're very pleased that they've met us. The change that we want to make is this one. So show the impact. That's what I would suggest. So the impact before the reporting, probably.
I love that. And I think with these pieces of advice, with these notes, I think we can wrap up this episode. I think it's given a lot of great advice on how associations can stay relevant through the way they explain their mission, through the way they craft their narrative and future-proof themselves, because also with technologies ever changing, with our audiences also changing, we could have discussed also the role of the new generations and the future generations and how do we cater to them. But maybe that's gonna be another excuse to meet up again for another episode.
With pleasure.
Thank you so much to Gökşen for joining us, and for Simona as well for being with us here in the studio. Thanks to all of you for listening to this episode of Associations Unplugged. Please don't forget to subscribe, to share it with any colleague who wants to strengthening the position and the narrative of their organization, and we'll see each other in the next episode.